Okay, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Rachel Lee from the organization Help for Domestic Workers. Right? Good. Good. Rachel is the case management leader at Help. She has a team that helps individuals, OFWs like yourselves, if an employer is not following their contract responsibilities. Rachel and her team assist where they can. Let me share just a little bit more background. Rachel has been with Help, I'm not sure, 2 years. 2 years now. She is an attorney or a lawyer, and she's good. She helped one of our sisters from the Everyday Branch, if you all recall, Mary Ann, who was here and left over the summer. Mary Ann was terminated by her employer after working there for about, I think, 6 years. She was entitled to severance, but her employer set her up for immediate termination. So she would receive nothing. President Sweeney and Sister Sweeney brought Mary Ann over to meet with Rachel. Rachel went through her case and not only got her severance paid, but also got the employer to pay for her trip home. So, can help you? Yes, they can. Now, what Rachel will share with you today is your rights. It's important to know your rights. As OFWs, it's difficult. You're trying to support your family, you're trying to manage, you want to please your employer, but there are limits on what you should stand for or tolerate in terms of breaking of the contract. Anyhow, I'll talk less. I'll turn the time over to Rachel. And Rachel, my guess is you can probably project well from where you are, but would a mic be helpful?
Can you all hear me? Is it okay? Yes, it's okay.
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 Great.
Thank you, everyone. Kamusta? So my name is Rachel. I'm from Help for Domestic Workers. Some of you may know us from when we were back in St. John's Cathedral. We used to be based there, but we've become an independent organization since 2021. So we're now in Sheung-Wan. So today I'm here to share a little bit about what you should know working as a domestic workers in Hong Kong. I'm sure a lot of you have worked in Hong Kong for a long time already, so some of these might be a little bit basic, but we have other modules too, so welcome to join our other classes. And I don't want to be like talking at you, so if you have questions or interesting experience you want to share, feel free to just raise your hands and we can have like an interactive, fun discussion, okay? So, as I mentioned, Help used to be at St. John's Cathedral. We were actually founded in 1989. Our programs focus on 3 things. The first thing is to prevent crisis. So we do this by delivering education classes to domestic workers, OFWs like you guys. But we also educate employers because the employment relationship has 2 people in it, right? So we want to make sure that we also inform employers what their responsibilities are in order to prevent unpleasant things from happening, in order to make sure everybody's happy in the employment relationship. So the second pillar is what President Stone mentioned, to respond to crisis. So I myself am a lawyer, and my team provides direct advice and assistance to OFWs who are in crisis, like Mary Ann. Sometimes we get cases that are more serious, like workers who are being abused and they need to leave immediately, they need to go to shelter, have labor tribunal claims, complicated legal issues. So we assist with everything, all kind of matters, from labor disputes to if they have issue with their loan company, for example, like money lending issues, or if they have issue with immigration, they may have overstayed without knowing that they overstayed, etc. So everything legal, my team helps. The third pillar is to build resilience in the community. So we do this by providing our very popular physical activity classes. So you can see these ladies doing yoga. We also have mental health counseling programs. So if you're interested, you can connect with me and I can share more information with you. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have various other modules under our education programs. This is just our first module on basic Know Your Rights. So yeah, before I start, this is our contact information, our telephone and WhatsApp. I also have some calling cards here, so feel free to come and take some of our calling cards. I'm afraid the QR code doesn't work, I'm very sorry, I just realized, but the WhatsApp number is there, the phone number. And I have some QR codes so you can, some calling cards, so you can take it with our information. So if you or your friends ever need help, feel free to contact us. Okay, so let's start. I guess maybe I can share a little bit more about why I do this work. So I was brought up by a dede until I was 14. So I've always been very grateful. My dede is like my sister to me. She used to buy halo halo for me when I was a kid. That's why I was very fat. I ate too much halo halo. But yeah, I've always been very grateful of my domestic worker who looked after myself and my brother. But unfortunately, I think OFWs in Hong Kong sometimes don't get the respect that they deserve. And a lot of employers, unfortunately, don't follow the rules and protections for domestic workers. So it's really important for you to know what are your rights, so in case something happens, you know how to deal with that situation. Okay, so let's start. So I guess everybody knows that your the standard length of employment is for 2 years, right? Yes. During COVID, you used to be able to apply for deferral of home leave, but that has become more difficult now because like international travel is again very common. Do you guys know if it's possible to extend your visa for just a short period of time? So for example, if you finish your 2 years and your employer said, oh, actually, I need you for another 2 months, can you just extend by a short period of time? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, it's possible. You just need to submit an application to the immigration department. So let's say you finish contract. So you're waiting for your new visa in Hong Kong. And your new employer told you, can you just come and start working for me before your new visa comes in? Can you do that? No. Why not? Yes, it's actually not legal to start work before your work visa comes in, even if you're already in Hong Kong. So a lot of OFW falls into this trap. They may start working for the employer before their visa comes in. So make sure that you don't do that, because it is possible that the immigration department do like routine checks and find you working without the proper visa. And is there a probation period for domestic worker? Is that so like in other jobs sometimes there could be like a 3 months probation, and during this time you try to be on your best behavior so that your employer will continue with your employment. Do we have the same thing with domestic workers? You think so?
Is it 3 months?
Is it 3 months? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, as far as I know, they said it's 3 months.
So actually, contractually, there is no probation period for domestic workers. Yeah. So if your employer tells you something like, oh, you have a 3-month probation or you have a 2-month probation, it's not technically in the contract. So the employer cannot impose additional requirement based on the probation period. So the employer cannot say, for example, during a probation period, you cannot take Sunday off. That's not reasonable and also not legal. So just be mindful of that. There's no probation period for domestic. Yes.
I want to ask a question that how about the statutory holiday? Is it still like you need to wait for 3 months?
So That's a really good question. So you, in your first 3 months of your employment, you can take statutory holiday, but technically the employer doesn't have to pay you. So you can still take it, but the employer doesn't have to pay you. Yes. Okay, I'm just going to continue, but feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. So this is the standard employment contract. You all have seen it, I'm sure. What I want to emphasize is sometimes employer may ask you to sign like a different paper or like an additional agreement to this. That is not allowed under Hong Kong law, okay? This is the only contract that is recognized by the Hong Kong government. So if sometimes employers are very sneaky, they may say, oh, I want to change, I don't know, like let's say I want to change this term, that term, I made a new contract. That is not possible. So your employment is governed by only this one document. And how many of you have read your contract from page 1 to page 4? Like the whole thing? Some of you? Yes. So I encourage you, when you go home, to actually read your contract from page 1 to page 4. Because this contract sets out all the basic information that you need to know, even if you might have worked in Hong Kong for a really long time. Sometimes it's easy to forget. Sometimes things change. So for example, like in the last 5 years or so, they added a clause saying that workers cannot reach their body out to clean windows because unfortunately there were a few accidents where workers fell to their death. So these are new things that are added. So I encourage you all to read your contract. It's not too difficult. It's like simple English, and it's good to know what's in the contract. Okay. Work visa. So most of you probably have a work visa like this attached to your passport when you enter Hong Kong. Some of you may have the A4 paper, the white paper. So the work visa is important because it provides the start date of your employment. Okay, so let's say when you finish your contract, or if your contract is terminated, how we calculate or prepare a computation is based on the day you enter Hong Kong. So it's important that you know when you actually start work. So for example, this person started December 30th, and because it's 2 years, right? So the the visa is valid until December 30, 2015, for example. Okay, so sometimes, especially now, the immigration do a lot of the things online. So you may have like an e-visa, e-copy of this and that. Just make sure you keep a copy and double check so that you know what your own employment terms are. Okay, work address. This one is tricky. I think everybody knows that you have to work in the address stated on the contract, right? But what if, let's say, your employer came and your employer said, oh, can you go and clean my mother-in-law's house? Is that allowed? No, yeah. So you can only work and live on the address that is on your contract. I've had a few cases where workers never read their contract, and then they only realized later that the address on the contract is different from the address that they're actually working in. So this is again something to remind each other and check whenever you start work with a new employer, because again this can be tricky, because if there is ever an issue and let's say you have a labor claim, it may become an issue at the labor department. The officer may say, why are you working at an address that is different from your contractual address, because it is technically breaching your condition of stay. It can be serious. So what should you do if your employer is asking you to, oh, can you clean I have a second house in this area, can you go clean my second house, or can you go look after my auntie's dog when she's away? Like what should you do if this happens? Anyone has experience of this, like being asked to work at a different...
She has.
Yeah, so what did you do?
I asked my employer that is you allowed to clean my mother's house, but I said no. First I said yes, okay, I help, but the next day I asked my employer, I keep that my contract, and then he read it, and then he asked me, he did not talk, he go.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Then next day he did not go.
He didn't say anything. But that's good. Like, so it's important to explain to your employer that you cannot work at an address other than that stated on your contract, because otherwise it would be a breach of your contract and also the immigration laws in Hong Kong. So I want to share something that's come up recently with you all. So I have a few cases where workers working at their employer's address, but the employer is using their house as like Airbnb. Do you guys know Airbnb? Like they're renting it out for travelers. And then the worker ended up being arrested for helping to operate an unlicensed hotel or guest house, which is a offense in Hong Kong. So this is a new trend that I'm seeing. So if any of your friends or yourself is in this situation, just be a bit mindful, because even though you are quite passive in this situation, innocent, you know, your employer lives there, you work there, it's not your fault that they are operating it as an Airbnb, but you may end up being implicated if there's enforcement action against. So Airbnb is actually not legal in Hong Kong. It's not related to domestic work, but just for your information, because it's not a licensed guest house. So this is an interesting issue that came up recently. Just want to share with you all. So if your employer moves, you make sure that you and your employer informs the immigration within 7 days, okay? Yeah, so this is the form to use to inform the immigration if there's any change to the duties or the address, etc., etc. Okay, wages. The current minimum wage is 4,990, and the food allowance is 1,236. Am I correct? Yes. I think I am. Yes. Okay. So how many of you receive your wages in cash? Do you sign a wage receipt?
Yes.
Okay, good. You all are very professional. Okay. So you know. No. Okay. How about bank transfer? Yes, President.
Question, on the minimum wage, I thought it was 4,730.
So it's been adjusted, I think in September 2024. So the government adjusted every year because of inflation. So this is the latest minimum wage. But if the contract is signed before, I think this is September 2024, then it's still on the previous year's minimum wage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the contract was signed in 2022, it would still be for 730.
For 730.
Okay, so for you guys who receive your salary in cash, it's always a good practice to sign a wage receipt. If you don't, maybe keep a copy. Like if your employer doesn't provide you with a receipt, maybe make a copy yourself, make a record yourself. Because not inevitably, but if there is an issue like a dispute, if wages is paid by cash, there's always this argument about whether it's been paid, whether it's the right amount, whether this or that. So it's always good to keep a record of these things. And how many of you get food allowance? So if your employer doesn't provide you with food, then the employer should provide you with additional food allowance, so 1,236. How many of you eat with your employer but the food is not enough, or it's not what you like, or nobody has this issue? You do? You cannot eat spicy food. Okay, so what do? You buy your
we buy our own.
You buy your own, okay. So this is unfortunately a common issue. A lot of workers, even though the employer provides food, the food may not be enough. It may not be suitable. Like you don't get spicy food, but your employer likes spicy food. It's a tricky issue to handle, but I would suggest having an open discussion with your employer if this ever was an issue, and or even suggesting, that maybe they give you the food allowance for you to buy and make your own food instead of you eating with them, because the food is just not suitable. And food is important. If I don't eat, I cannot work, right? And you guys work a lot with your body, so you need proper food. Any questions on wages? Any? Oh, I have one more question. So sometimes on the contract, your wages may be the statutory minimum. So let's say 4,990. But the employer actually gives you more. Let's say the employer is actually giving you 5,000 or 6,000. Is that okay? Is it okay that the salary you actually receive? So the reason again, if in the future there is a dispute, it's always good to have a record of your real salary, okay? Because if On the contract, the salary is lesser than the actual salary that you receive, and if there's a dispute, what we usually do is we use, of course, a higher salary to help you guys computate your entitlements, but you need proof. You need proof
Yeah.
to show that your actual salary is, let's say, 5,000 or whatever. So it's always, that's why it's important to have receipts, yes.
Yes, my employer have like that. My salary is for 730. Sometimes he give me 5,000, and she have another like that, and I will sign. And it's signed there is it's like a bonus.
Right, a bonus, yeah. So make sure that you have a record, because I have one lady who's a driver whose actual salary was $10,000, but on the salary receipt it said 6,000, and she signed them. So it's really hard for me to argue for her that her real salary is 10,000 when she had a labor claim. So it's important that if you do sign a salary receipt, that the receipt is correct, okay? Make sure you read it and make sure it's accurate. Right. Okay, this is an issue that comes up quite a lot with the clients that we see, salary deduction. Can your employer deduct your salary? Is it legal? No? Some say no. So the answer is that under some circumstances, yes, the employer can deduct under very specific circumstances. Okay, so there are two key areas that are relevant for that are more relevant for OFWs. So the first is if you've damaged or lost the employer's items. Okay, but you have to be mindful that the maximum amount that the employer can deduct per item is $300. Okay, $300 per item. That's the maximum. So even if, like, I hope it doesn't happen, but even if you crash a car and it costs a lot of money, the maximum is $300. Yes.
How about the driver? For example, there's a damage on the car.
Yes.
More than 1,000.
Yes. So
Can the boss will deduct for me?
no, that's what I'm saying. So
So
even
that is still
the maximum is
it's a driver.
even if it's the driver, yes. So this law applies to everyone. It applies to me. It applies to everyone who's employed in Hong Kong. The maximum that the employer can deduct is only $300. So sometimes the employer, I have cases where the worker might have, I don't know, damaged a washing machine, and the employer says, oh, I need to deduct half of your salary. That's not legal, okay? The maximum per item is $300. And the total deduction for damaged item cannot exceed 25% of your salary. Okay, so even if you damage like multiple things, the total deduction cannot exceed 1/4 of your salary. So the employer cannot be like, oh, you damaged the TV, the washing machine, this and that, blah, 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 and then end up deducting your entire salary. That's not allowed under the law in Hong Kong, okay? The maximum deduction is only 1/4 of your salary. And so can the employer deduct your salary if, let's say, the child, you were supposed to take the child to school, but then you were late? So you made a mistake, let's say. Can the employer deduct your salary? No, no. So again, important to remember, because some employers try to deduct salary if their worker has made a mistake or something like that. That is not allowed, okay? So, yes.
And the employer expects you to pay your way when you're taking her child to school.
So like transport and all that.
Yes.
That's again not very clear under the ordinance. It doesn't really explain whether, like, who should bear those kind of costs. But again, I would suggest that if this happened to any of you, to talk to your employer and just say, look, it doesn't make sense for me to pay for my own transport when I'm working, so you should pay for my octopus top-up, for example. Yeah. So there's another situation that your employer can deduct your salary, which is not on the PowerPoint. It is if your employer has made a loan, like an advancement or a loan to you. I know that a lot of you have a lot of financial pressure, maybe supporting a lot of family members back home, so from time to time you may need to take out loans from your employer. So if your employer has made a loan for you, they can deduct your salary to recover that loan, but the total deduction cannot exceed 50% of your salary. Okay, so the employer again cannot be like, oh, I've advanced your, let's say the employer advanced your October loan, and then in November the employer said, I'm not going to pay you anything because I already advanced your loan. That's actually not allowed under the law. Okay, the maximum they can deduct is 50% of your salary. So again, if this happens to you or your friends, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to give you some more information about this. Like loans is a whole different issue. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm just mentioning it because I know it happens to a lot of clients. If your employer is deducting your salary, again, really important to make a record. So for example, on your wage receipt, make a record what has been deducted, how much has been deducted, because if you need to contest it, you have that record, right? So you can go to labor, or you can come to us and we can help you see if it's legal. Right, rest day. So do you all get one rest day per week?
Yes.
Yes.
But we are Cinderella, we have time.
You have time. You're Cinderella, yes. You have curfew, yeah, I know. So under the employment law in Hong Kong, a rest day means a full 24-hour rest day. I know for a lot of you that is not possible. Maybe the employer will ask you to work a little bit, go home early, go home by 8, or work a little bit before you leave, maybe make breakfast or whatever, like with the dog on Sunday before you go. Like very technically speaking, that is actually not allowed. So you can actually tell your employer that I am entitled to full 24-hour rest day, and so I'm not going to work on Sunday. But I know practically it's not. It's difficult. I understand it's difficult.
You'll be like, pack your things.
Sorry.
Goodbye.
You get late.
I know I know it may not be very practical, but it's something that you can think about, like bringing up with your employer. You can tell them that, look, sir, madam, like actually I shouldn't be working. So do you mind if I do this on Monday, or do you mind if I don't do this? Even if you have a curfew, when you get home, they shouldn't be asking you to wash the dishes, make dinner, put the kids to bed, like all those. Like even if you have to be home, you should still be able to rest. So you can rest in your room, do your own thing. So full 24 hours.
What if like you're sleeping with a kid?
Yeah, so I understand.
So like
That's why I understand it is practically can be very difficult. But again, this is different with each of you. Maybe you have a different relationship with your employer, your work is different. So it's for you to judge how you want to manage this, I guess. Like there's no one size fit all answer. So what if your employer asks you to work on Sunday? Let's say, I don't know, let's say a grandma is here to visit, can you work this Sunday? It's okay,
As
but
long as you are being paid.
yeah, sometimes you're being paid extra days, that's okay. Or your employer needs to give you an alternative day. Like under the law it says within 30 days, so within a month the employer needs to give you an alternative day. So they may say, okay, you can go on Wednesday instead or whatever, but you may prefer to be paid, which is okay. If your employer is not giving you a rest day, or if any of your friends are like working continuously without rest, again, that's a problem and they should get some advice. How do you compute the rest day pay? Do you guys know? Like how do you, so if, let's say if you have to work on a Sunday, how do you calculate your daily pay? So these are, this is using the old wages from 2023-4870. But yeah, just for your own reference, the way to compute your daily pay rate is your monthly salary divided by the number of days in that month. So for example, if your salary is 4870, then your daily allowance is 162. So your employer should pay you 162 extra if they ask you to work an extra Sunday, for example. Yeah. So there are actually two ways. This is the first method. Your monthly salary divided by the number of days in that month. Or second method is so it's your monthly salary times 12. So your entire month, your entire yearly salary divided by 365. So the number of days in that year. Does that make sense? Yeah, just a reference so that you know roughly. Okay. Right, accommodation. So someone else mentioned before, what if you sleep with the kids? So does your contract specify your accommodation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Do you guys know what your sleeping arrangement is before you start working with your employer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've read it. Okay, that's good. So a lot of workers didn't really read through the contract before they start their employment, and then they may end up being asked to sleep in the living room or in the kitchen or in the balcony. I know Hong Kong is very small, but the employer has the responsibility to provide proper accommodation, and it's actually in your contract. So if you sign a new contract, for example, make sure you ask about the accommodation and check that it is written down accurately on the contract, because I also have cases where on the contract it says you get your own room, blah blah blah, and then when you get there you were asked to sleep on the balcony or something like that. So yes.
Would a proper accommodation be considered a roof with a partial roof?
It's arguable. It depends on whether the employer has declared it truthfully on the contract, because theoretically the employer needs to disclose the accommodation on the contract, and when that's submitted to the immigration will assess whether that is appropriate. But what tends to happen sometimes is that the employer will say something else, so they'll say that the worker has a room or whatever, but then when the worker gets there, it's entirely different. So that's actually a breach of contract. So theoretically the worker can say that I'm not going to continue working here because I don't have proper accommodation, and it's a deviation from my employment terms, for example. But it is, again, one of those areas where I know for a lot of workers it's really hard, because they pay a lot of money for agency fee recruitment to work in Hong Kong, and just to break your contract because of accommodation may not be very feasible for a lot of workers. So make sure you check your contract, especially when you sign a new contract with a new employer. So some examples of unsuitable accommodation could be makeshift beds in corridors, as I mentioned, or having to share rooms with adults of opposite sex. So like teenagers, like if it's like a 16-year-old boy, for example, that wouldn't be appropriate. Yeah. Any questions on accommodation? Anybody has any horror stories to share? You guys seem to have okay employers. You guys seem to have okay. And again, so your work duties is actually specified in your contract. And again, when you sign a new contract, make sure you read the work duties. So for example, some of you might have driving duties, I presume, or some of you may need to look after very young babies or animals. It should all be on your contract. And if and if you enter into a new employment, it's really important to double check your duties with your employer, because we again have cases where workers are asked to, let's say, work at an office, work at the employer's office, or help clean the employer's office. Is that legal? Is that domestic duties?
No.
No. Yeah. So that is actually, again, a breach of condition of stay. So it's really important that you are not asked to do things that are not in your contract and that are not domestic duties. So what if the employer say, I have a Taobao business, I sell clothes. Can you go pick up, I don't know, clothes from this warehouse and bring it home? Is that domestic duties? Yes?
Yes.
Some say yes, some say no. Well, it's like a gray area. I'd say it's not domestic duty, because domestic duties means housework, basically, right? So if you're picking things up from warehouse, bring them home, that is not domestic duties. And again, if this happens to any of you or your friends, make sure you get advice, because it may not be legal.
I got a question.
Yes.
What about disciplining children?
That's so. If the employer, I guess, asked you or gave you express permission, but it's an area that you really need to be very open with your employer about, like what they expect of you and what you can or cannot do. Because I understand that some of you may have worked for the same family for a really long time. You may really know the family or the kids, and you know what works, and the employer trusts you. But also it can become an issue. So I've had cases where the worker kind of slapped the kid's hand, and then the employer called the police saying that the worker is abusing the child. So again, these things can be very tricky. So especially if it's a new employer, new family that you're working for, make sure you talk to them about what is acceptable, because you don't want to be in that situation where you're suddenly accused of child abuse. Like, it's a serious thing to be accused of, and it took a really long time for us to help that worker to get out of that situation. So yeah, good question, but make sure you talk to your employer about what is and isn't acceptable. Yeah. Yes.
We've had issues where children have bitten their hair, or where they've thrown things at
Yes,
them,
yes.
hit them. Any counsel?
Yeah, so I've also had a few cases where the child is very violent towards the worker. I've had a few cases where the child has special needs. So our advice would be to document these issues. Like, so if the child has bitten you or thrown things at you, if you have pictures of bruises, take pictures. If you've been to the doctor, keep a record. Or if you've told your employer or friends, make sure you keep a record of like your WhatsApp record, your chat record, because it could be grounds for termination. For example, the worker can say that I don't feel safe anymore working in this environment. This is someone with special needs, which I don't have the special skills to deal with. It could be a grounds for termination, but to protect yourself, you need evidence, basically, because it's always going to be contentious. The employer is always going to be like, oh, my child is well behaved or whatever, and this never happened. So it's always good if something like this happened to keep a record, like just to protect yourself and make sure, yes.
Talking about the evidences, what are the legalities of employers being allowed to install CCTVs in living rooms, kitchen?
Yes, so CCTV in the living room and kitchen. So Hong Kong has very weak privacy laws. So CCTV in living room and kitchen is not illegal per se, as long as the employer has informed the worker that there is a CCTV. So for example, if you go to a lot of malls or shops, they may also have like CCTV inside the shop. It's kind of like similar. But if the employer has a CCTV in your room, or if there's like a hidden camera, sometimes there are cases where there's hidden cameras, that could potentially be a violation of your privacy. Especially if it's in the bathroom or your room where you might change. So again, if this happens to you or your friends, feel free to reach out and we can give you some advice.
We have a member whose employer put CCTV camera in his mom's home in the Philippines. So his mom is messaging that helper about, why are you doing this, blah, 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 blah. But she's not that in favor.
Wait, sorry. Who put CCTV in his house? Sorry.
The husband, put CCTV cameras in his mom's house in the Philippines. So that the mom can see what the helper is doing during the day while they are at work. So she would get messages from his mom saying, why are you doing this? Why did you not do that? And she was like, you're not my employer. You're not my boss. Why are you?
That's very strange. That's the first time I've heard. That's very strange. That's the first time I've heard of this. But yeah, like in general, CCTV, like in Hong Kong, in your employer's house is not legal per se, as I mentioned. The only issue is if the CCTV is in like a bathroom or like a private area. Does any of you have CCTV in your rooms?
No.
We don't know.
We don't know.
How to check if
Mine, I got a lot of camera,
How
pero
about
wala
keeping the
naman sa amin.
pictures on your mobile phone, for example, because you are very close to your employer and kids? You have a keeping pictures on the phone. Is that legal?
So that's a very good question. So keeping videos of your employer or the kids, yes, because as I said, Hong Kong has no law to stop you from doing that. But it can become an issue with the employer, so make sure you talk to them and you ask them. Social media is another issue. Like nowadays, people post things online all the time. Some employers really don't like it if you post their kids on social media. Again, this is something that you need to talk to your employer about. So we have a lady who's a YouTuber. Like she posts things with her employer and the kid all the time, and the employer is happy with that. But she obviously talked to her employer before she does this, right? So make sure you talk to them. It's not illegal per se, but it could become an issue. The employer could be like, oh, why? Especially if it's like young kids, I don't know, like let's say taking a bath, that kind of thing. It could be very innocent, but the employer may say, oh, why do you have a video of my child taking a bath? Like I didn't allow this or whatever. So make sure you communicate with your employer, and it's more about to protect yourself and not to kind of fall into traps. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What about acting as a tutor
Acting for tutor for tutor. Good question. Tricky. Yeah, like having to help with homework.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. They don't enroll the kids for phonics because I am the one who's teaching the phonics.
Yeah. Again, it's tricky whether it is domestic duties or not. I guess it's something that you need to, like, if, I think technically the employer should have told you that this is expected of you. Like, the employer should have told you during the interview that they expect you to help with the kids' homework. And if you're not comfortable, if you're like me, for example, my math is terrible. Like, if someone asks me to help them with their math homework, I'm gonna say no, because I'm gonna do it wrong, right? So like this is something that again you can discuss with your employer. I think unfortunately a lot of the protections for domestic workers is not very black or white. You know, like tutoring, for example. It's not technically domestic duty, but is it serious enough to say they've breached their contract? Not really. So I guess it's more up to whether you're comfortable doing it and whether the employer has told you that they need this help. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is about open communication. I know it can be hard, but if you're interviewing for a new employer, make sure you talk to them about all these issues so that you know what you're entering into, right? And you also protect yourself and make sure you're not being asked to do something that you don't want to or that you're not comfortable with. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the domestic duty is included in your contract. So if there's special requests, it should be listed here. I think that's it. That's all that I want to talk about. Are there any other questions about, yeah?
How to calculate the long service?
You want to know how to calculate long service? So, okay. So under what circumstances are you guys entitled to long service? Do you know? How many years do you need to have worked for your employer?
3 contracts?
6 years?
6 years.
20 years.
So you have to work for 5 or more years.
8 years.
You've worked for 8 years, yes, so you qualify. So you have to work for 5 or more years, and the employer has to be the one to let you go. Okay, so if you terminate your own contract, even if you work for 20 years, technically you're not entitled to long service. So yes. So
24 years.
Sorry?
24 years.
24 years. So either your employer said, I don't need you anymore because the kids are grown up or we are moving to another country or whatever, so I'm not going to renew, then yes, you will be entitled. Or if the employer said, okay, I'm terminating the contract for whatever reason, then yes, you are entitled to. But if you say, oh, I have a family emergency, I have to terminate the contract early and go home, or if you say, I don't want to renew because even if I work for you for 20 years, actually I don't really like you, just joking, but then you're not, technically you're not entitled to long service. So the employer has to be the one to let you go.
So it's not true that if you have 5 years,
It's not automatic. It's not automatic.
Oh, it depends on the
Yes,
employer.
it depends on the reason for termination. Okay, it's not automatic. So be very careful. I know a lot of ladies who work for a really long time and then there's this issue of will they or will they not get long service. What we try to do, of course, is even if maybe you were the one who initiated the termination or there's some argument about how the termination happened, we will try our best to fight like we did for Marianne. But again, if you have discussions with your employer close to your termination, always good to keep a record. I know a lot of things are said face to face, but let's say the employer say, oh, actually, we don't need you anymore because the kids are really old, so we're probably not going to renew. Make sure you have that like either on a recording, like you have a recording of that, or you have like a WhatsApp record. Because if it comes down to he said, she said, then it's often really hard to argue that you're entitled to long service. So it's not for granted. It's not automatic. But we at HELP, we try our best to fight for our clients for long service.
So all the employers know about the long service, or are they aware of it, or like?
I don't know if all the employers know.
Yeah, are they aware that?
Of course, it's
Because there are some employers said that
Just pretend.
they don't know about it. They haven't heard about it.
Yeah, so I see some cases where when the worker is close to getting long service, they will terminate and ask the worker to sign with a different member of the family. So So for the first 2 contracts with the wife, the second 2 contracts with the husband, and then so they want to cut it so that the worker cannot say they've served the same family for like a continuous period of time. It's tricky, but again, if any of you or your friends have any issue, feel free to reach out. Any other questions? Yeah.
I read the contract the other day, ma'am, and then I read there that the DH is entitled for the vacation for 7 days like that.
Yes.
What if we didn't use that vacation after 2 years? So what's the benefits that we can get?
So if you didn't take your annual leave, for example,
Because I read there that we are entitled to have vacation, for example, for 1 year, 7 days have vacation with pay.
Yes.
How about if we didn't?
So if you didn't take it, you can accumulate it. Let's say if your contract ends before you have taken all your vacation leave, you can get a payment instead of. So for example, if you have, let's say, 14 days accumulated, when your contract ends, you can ask for extra 14 days pay, for example. So you can get a payment instead of the holiday. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Example, in the contract there is 2 years, right? But in 1 year you have 7 days leave. 7 days holiday in 1 year. And if you want to go home, who pay for the ticket?
So again, this is not black and white. The contract doesn't say who needs to pay for the air ticket for your annual leave. The contract only says if the contract finished, the employer needs to pay your ticket home.
Yeah.
But for holiday, it doesn't say who needs to pay. So it's again something that you should talk to your employer about. A lot of employers are willing to pay, like especially if you go home during holidays, employers willing to pay for a round trip ticket. But equally, the employer has no obligation. I guess that's what I'm trying to explain. Yeah, the employer has no obligation to pay your air ticket for your annual leave. They only have obligation to pay air ticket when your contract finishes. Yeah.
If a helper is suspected to have a diagnosis of lump in the breast or sick, and the employer with that suspicion can terminate the helper.
So unfortunately, that happens a lot with our clients. So they're diagnosed with various kinds of sickness or disease or cancer, and then they get terminated. Very generally speaking, if you terminate someone because they're sick, it's disability discrimination in Hong Kong. It's not legal, but it's actually, like, frankly speaking, it's very hard to start a disability discrimination case because you need to show that this person terminated you because you're sick. But often the person who, the employer is not going to say, I'm terminating you because you have cancer. No one's going to leave that kind of evidence. So they'll say, because you've been neglectful of your duty, or your cooking is terrible, or whatever. Don't give another reason. So what you need to show is to show that the termination relates to the sickness, which is often difficult, but very generally speaking, it's not legal. Also, if the worker is being given paid sick leave, so you need to have a doctor's certificate. And if sickness is a different model, but just very briefly, they have to have a medical certificate from a doctor, and they need to have the sickness days accumulated. So for the first year when you work, you accumulate 4 sickness days. No, you accumulate 4 sickness days every month, so on and so forth. So if you have the sickness days and the doctor's certificate, and you're on paid sick leave, it's not legal to terminate. So there are some protection, but it's not very strong, unfortunately. Yeah.
What's gonna happen if we don't use the sick leave?
If you don't use.
If we don't use the sick leave.
If you don't use the sick leave, so there's a limit on how many days of sick leave you can accumulate. I think the maximum is something like 180 days. So that's the maximum number of sickness days you can accumulate. So if you ever become very sick and you take all that 180 days, then you will be on unpaid sick leave.
Okay. So will our employer pay for the medicines that we need?
So your employer is supposed to pay for your medical care in Hong Kong. It's again in your contract.
Is there any special load for the domestic helper with our healthcare, or no?
On your contract, in your contract, it says that your employer needs to pay for your medical care.
Insurance.
Yes, they should have. This is a tricky thing. Insurance for work injury is compulsory in Hong Kong. So if you slip and then you injure your knee or something like that, that is compulsory. but insurance for other health issue is actually not compulsory. So some of your employers may only have the very minimum insurance for work injury.
Yeah.
Again, this is something, if you like, you can check with your employer what is the level of insurance, because I have a lot of cases where unfortunately worker found out that they have, let's say, cancer, and then the employer's like, oh, actually, I don't have health insurance for you. I only have the basic
Yeah.
work injury insurance, and then the worker end up being terminated because the employer don't want to pay the hospital bills, and then it becomes very tricky. So good to check with your employer what is the insurance that you have, and what does it cover? Does it cover dental, for example? Does it cover hospital stay, or is it very basic? Yeah.
So if that's the case, like worst scenario, did the Hong Kong government have like a healthcare help for the domestic helper?
Yeah, so it's a tricky issue because if the worker is still employed, so if they still have a valid work visa, there are some government subsidy for people who need like surgery, for example, or they can apply for what we call fee waiver at the hospital. But you have to be on an employment contract, so you have to be employed. But if you are terminated and you're on a visitor visa, then the care you can receive is very limited unless you can pay, and it's very expensive. I think for me, or for you guys, as eligible person, because I presume you're all employed, the emergency room is I think like 180 Hong Kong dollars per day. But if you become a visitor, let's say you're terminated, I think it's 4,000 or something like that. Like it's a big difference, and it becomes not very accessible. So it's a tricky issue when OFWs are sick in Hong Kong and terminated, because then they cannot receive very comprehensive care unless they have money, basically.
Yeah.
As a domestic helper, is there any start of the day or end of the day of an hour to work?
Yeah, so Hong Kong has no maximum work hours regulation. So it's something that you discuss with your employer. There's no hopefully it's not 24 hours, but Hong Kong has no law on work hours. So it's up to
16 hours.
Unlimited.
I work from 5 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Oh,
5 to 5.
me, I'm 16 hours to work.
You have yeah, I
Same
know,
with
I
me.
know a lot of
Same
you
with
work
me.
very
Yeah.
long hours.
Until 1
So
a.m.
it's
5 a.m. to 5 a.m.
It's something good to talk to your employer about. Like, let's say if you have to look after someone who's elderly or child, you know, maybe you can take a break in the middle, maybe you can take some additional rest. It's something you need to discuss with your employer, but there's no, again, black and white rule on this. Yeah.
Okay.
How about if you finish contract and then you process a new employer?
Yeah.
Do you know how many weeks or months to process it?
It depends. I think roughly 1 to 2 months. But if there are issues, so again, just to share with you all, recently the immigration starts questioning workers if they have loan issues, especially if if a previous employer had put in a complaint about the worker's loan issue. So we have a few cases where the application is stuck because the immigration questioned the worker about their financial situation. So again, this is something, it's a different topic, but it's something to be mindful of, like how do you manage your loans, and you know, yeah. But in general, if there's no problem, it's 1 to 2 months.
1 to 2 months.
Yeah.
Now, regarding with the long service, what if after the third contract, you're served as 6 years, right? Then your employer give you your long service fee. Then you continue your contract with them working, so you will fourth and fifth or more. So what if during that period the helper don't want to work
Don't want to continue anymore. Yeah.
So what will happen to the long service that paid
Before, yeah, I
before?
understand your question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, very tricky question, because technically the employer has no obligation to advance the long service. They can technically ask for it back. So we have a few cases where the employer paid long service, and then subsequently there's like a disagreement, and then the employer's like, okay, let's terminate, but I'm going to ask for the long service back. It's tricky because again, the employer has no obligation, so they kind of advance it, right? So they can ask for it back.
But the giving of the long service is agreed
At the time, yeah, I agree.
hit by or it's willfully given by the employer.
Yeah, but the issue is that
Willfully given.
yeah, I understand what you mean. But the issue is that they are not legally obliged to give. So so they can kind of ask for it back. It's a little tricky. So we've had a few cases like this where we try to argue for the worker, oh, it's a gift or it's a bonus, but it's not always possible. It depends a little bit on the discussion of what happened, but I don't have like a straight answer for those kind of situations. Yeah, I guess in general, very good idea to like document these things. Like if the employer advanced long service, make sure you sign a receipt or whatever, so that if there's a dispute in the future, you have some proof to protect yourself. Yes.
So what protection can the helper and the employer can do so that later there will be no dispute?
So it's always good to have things down in writing, especially something like this. Like something like, by mutual agreement, we agreed to, like my employer agreed to pay X amount to worker on this date. That's always good.
No return, no exchange.
If your condition is not ideal, it's always good to have like pictures or WhatsApp record or evidence, to support your case. What is not good is if everything is said orally and then you have no proof to support yourself. So make recordings, take pictures, sign documents, have a notebook yourself, keep records. That's always a good idea in general. Yeah.
Rachel?
Yes. Yes,
we've
I know.
had
I'm
you
aware of
here
times. Yeah.
For an hour,
Yes.
and I just want to be respectful of your time. This, I think, has been really, really helpful for a lot of people here. And so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Before you conclude, can you just tell us a little bit about, you mentioned you have other workshops.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. So we have a WhatsApp group for our activities. So this is our WhatsApp community. We regularly promote other activities, including our workshop, but also our yoga class. We have a program with the Kaduri Farm where we have a visit every Sunday. So these are all promoted on our WhatsApp group. So you can join our WhatsApp group. For more information, you can also follow us on social media and get our updates from there. We have other workshops on managing your money, what to do with loans, what to do with termination, how to protect yourself online. So yeah, you can follow us and get the latest updates. Yeah. Saturday session. We most of our activities on Sunday, unfortunately.
I'm from HongKong.
Oh, you've been there.
My big mother is in Third Avenue. They have workshop, but it's all Saturday.
It's all yeah. Most of our activities is on Sunday, and we're a bit short-staffed at the moment, so we don't do a lot on Saturday. Yeah.
Well, Rachel,
Thank you.
we thank you. Let's give a